The carbon monoxide alarm screamed through the cabin at 2 in the morning, but Serena Vale was already too dizzy to stand. Outside, the blizzard tore at the mountain like it wanted to rip everything apart. Landon Ridge kicked through the door, ice in his beard, blood on his knuckles from fighting the frozen generator, and found the billionaire heiress collapsed against the wall, her lips turning blue. This wasn't supposed to be how either of them died, not on this god-forsaken ridge, not for a family that had thrown her away like garbage, not before they'd even figured out what the hell they were building together. If you want to see how a single father and a runaway heiress survive when the mountain tries to kill them both, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Landon Ridge was 32 years old, and he had learned a long time ago that silence was cheaper than conversation. He stood on the porch of the half-rebuilt cabin, hammer in one hand, coffee gone cold in the other, watching the black SUV tear up the gravel road like it was being chased. It wasn't. Nobody came up this mountain in late November unless they were lost or running from something, and that SUV didn't look lost. The vehicle skidded to a stop 20 feet from the porch, spitting gravel and mud across the clearing. The engine cut. The driver's door opened, and a man in a suit stepped out. Dark jacket, no tie. The kind of guy who looked like he spent his weekends at a gun range. He didn't say anything. Just stood there with his arms crossed, staring at Landon like he was waiting for permission. Landon didn't give it. He set the coffee mug on the porch rail and kept his eyes on the SUV. The back door opened. She came out slow, like she was giving herself time to decide whether this was real or some kind of punishment she could still talk her way out of. 30 years old, maybe. Long dark coat, boots that had never seen mud before today, and a face that was too sharp to be soft but too tight to be calm. Her eyes scanned the cabin, the woods, the sky, and then landed on Landon with the kind of look that said she'd already figured out he wasn't going to make this easy. "This is it?" she said. Her voice cut through the cold air like a blade. Landon didn't answer right away. He took his time looking at her, then at the man in the suit, then back at her. "Depends what you're asking." She walked toward the porch, her boots crunching on the gravel. The man in the suit stayed by the SUV, watching. "This cabin," she said, "this is the property owned by the Vale Family Trust?" "Yeah." "And you're the contractor?" "Yeah." She stopped at the bottom of the steps, looked up at him, and for just a second something flickered across her face, something that wasn't anger or arrogance, something closer to exhaustion, but it was gone before Landon could name it. "My name is Serena Vale. I'm here to stay." Landon set the hammer down on the porch rail next to the coffee. "No, you're not." Her jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. This place isn't set up for guests. No heat in half the rooms, no running water after 6 o'clock, and the road's going to close in 2 weeks when the snow hits hard. You don't want to be here." "I didn't ask what I want," Serena said, her voice flat and cold. "I told you I'm staying." The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Miss Vale's father has arranged for her to remain on the property for the winter. All the paperwork's been filed. You'll continue your work as contracted, and she'll be staying in the main cabin." Landon looked at the man, then back at Serena. "Your father sent you up here?" "My father," Serena said slowly, like the words tasted bad, "decided I needed to learn a lesson." "What kind of lesson?" "The kind that involves isolation, manual labor, and no access to my credit cards." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He thinks if I spend a winter freezing my ass off on a mountain, I'll come back grateful and obedient." Landon studied her for a long moment. There was something in the way she said it, like she was reading from a script she didn't believe in. "And you're just going along with it? Do I look like I have a choice?" The man in the suit stepped forward, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "Mr. Ridge, this is a letter from the Trust's legal team. It outlines the arrangement. Miss Vale will be residing here until spring. You'll continue your restoration work and provide basic assistance as needed. You'll be compensated for any additional time or materials." Landon didn't take the envelope. "I didn't sign up to babysit a billionaire." Serena's eyes flashed. "I don't need a babysitter." "Then what do you need?" "A place to stay," she said. "That's it. You do your work, I'll stay out of your way, and in 6 months we'll both walk away and never think about this again." Landon shook his head. You really think you're going to last 6 months up here? I guess we'll find out. The man in the suit handed the envelope to Landon, who finally took it, more to get the guy to back off than anything else. Her bags are in the trunk, the man said. I'll bring them up. Don't bother, Landon said. She can carry her own bags. Serena's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. Fine. The man in the suit looked like he wanted to argue, but Serena waved him off. It's fine, Marcus. Just go. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. He got back in the SUV, started the engine, and backed down the gravel road without another word. Serena stood there in the clearing, watching the vehicle disappear around the bend, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked small. Landon walked down the porch steps and stopped a few feet from her. You got a suitcase in that trunk? Or did they just dump you here with the clothes on your back? I have bags, Serena said. 3 of them. 3? I didn't know what to pack for a mountain prison. Landon almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he walked past her to the SUV and popped the trunk. Inside were 3 expensive-looking suitcases, the kind that probably cost more than his truck. He grabbed 2 of them, hefted them onto his shoulders, and started walking back toward the cabin. Wait, Serena called after him. Where are you going? Inside, Wendy's, Landon said. Unless you'd rather sleep out here. She grabbed the 3rd suitcase and followed him up the steps. The cabin door was already open. Landon didn't believe in locking things when there was nobody around to steal them, and he pushed it wider with his boot. Inside, the place looked like what it was, a construction zone. Half the floorboards were new, half were old and warped. The walls were stripped down to bare wood in some places, freshly painted in others. There was a wood stove in the corner, a folding table with blueprints spread across it, and a sleeping bag on the floor near the stove. Serena stepped inside and looked around. This is it? This is it. Where's the furniture? There isn't any. I'm fixing the structure first. Furniture comes later. She set her suitcase down and crossed her arms. Where am I supposed to sleep? Landon dropped her other 2 bags on the floor. There's a bedroom in the back. No heat, but the roof doesn't leak. You'll need to bring blankets. And the bathroom? Outhouse is around the side of the cabin. Indoor plumbing's not hooked up yet. Serena stared at him. You're joking. Nope. I'm supposed to use an outhouse in the middle of winter? Unless you've got a better idea. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Landon could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out if this was some kind of test or if he was just an asshole. Probably both. Fine, she said finally. I'll make it work. Landon nodded. Good. There's firewood stacked outside. You'll need to keep the stove going if you don't want to freeze. I'll show you how to work it. I can figure it out. No, you can't. She glared at him, but he ignored it. He walked over to the wood stove, opened the iron door, and pointed at the inside. You need kindling first, small stuff. Then you build up to the bigger logs. Don't overload it, or it'll smoke you out. And don't let it go cold because it's a bitch to restart. Serena watched him, her arms still crossed, her expression unreadable. Anything else? Yeah, Landon said. Don't touch my tools, don't mess with the blueprints, and don't expect me to cook for you. I wasn't planning on it. Good. They stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, Serena grabbed one of her suitcases and dragged it toward the back bedroom. Landon watched her go, then turned back to the wood stove and started feeding it more logs. This was going to be a long winter. Balkan. The first night, Serena didn't sleep. Landon knew because he heard her moving around in the back room, heard the rustle of blankets and the creak of floorboards, heard her swear under her breath when something fell over in the dark. He didn't get up to help. If she wanted to figure it out on her own, that was her business. By morning, she looked like hell. Her hair was tangled, her eyes had dark circles under them, and her expensive coat was covered in dust from the cabin. She came out of the bedroom carrying an empty water bottle and stopped when she saw Landon sitting at the folding table, eating oatmeal straight from the pot. Is there coffee? She asked. No. Are you serious? I don't drink coffee. She stared at him like he'd just told her he didn't believe in gravity. How do you live? I wake up and get to work, Landon said. You should try it. Serena's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She filled her water bottle from the jug on the counter, took a long drink, and then set it down. What are you working on today? Replacing the porch supports. They're rotted through. Can I help? Landon looked up at her, surprised. You want to help? I need something to do, she said. I'm not going to sit around all day staring at the walls. You ever done construction work before? No. Then you'll probably just get in the way. Her eyes flashed, and for a second, Landon thought she was going to snap at him, but instead, she just nodded. Fine. I'll get in the way then. Landon finished his oatmeal, grabbed his jacket, and headed outside. Serena followed. The porch was a mess. The old support beams had been holding up the roof for probably 50 years, and half of them were so rotten that Landon could push his thumb through the wood. He'd already pulled out the worst ones and stacked them by the fire pit. Now he was measuring the new beams, cutting them to size and fitting them into place. Serena stood on the edge of the porch, watching. What do you need me to do? Hold this, Landon said, handing her the end of a tape measure. She took it, and he stretched the tape across the length of the beam. She held it steady while he marked the wood with a pencil, then let it snap back into the case. That's it? For now. He grabbed the circular saw, lined up the blade with the mark, and cut through the beam in one clean motion. The smell of fresh cut wood filled the air, sharp and clean. He set the saw down, picked up the beam, and carried it over to the porch. Now what? Serena asked. Now you hold it in place while I nail it. She moved to the other end of the beam and pressed her hands against it, bracing it against the porch frame. Landon pulled a hammer and a handful of nails from his tool belt, lined up the first nail, and drove it through the wood with 3 hard strikes. The sound echoed across the clearing, loud and sharp. You're strong, Serena said. Landon didn't look up. It's just leverage. Still. He finished nailing the beam into place, then stepped back to check the level. It was good. Straight. Solid. He nodded, more to himself than to her. All right. Next one. They worked like that for the next 2 hours. Landon cutting, Serena holding, Landon nailing. She didn't complain, didn't ask for breaks, didn't try to make small talk. She just did what he told her to do. And by the time they finished, her hands were covered in sawdust and her coat had a smear of grease across the sleeve. Landon stepped off the porch and looked up at the new supports. They were clean, strong, and they'd hold for another 50 years. Not bad, he said. Thanks, Serena said. She sounded tired, but there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Something that sounded almost like pride. Landon glanced at her. You all right? I'm fine. Your hands are shaking. She looked down at her hands, then shoved them into her pockets. I said I'm fine. Landon didn't push it. He grabbed the old beams and started carrying them over to the fire pit. Serena followed, picking up the smaller pieces and adding them to the pile. When they were done, Landon pulled a lighter from his pocket and set the whole thing on fire. The flames climbed high, crackling and spitting sparks into the cold air. They stood there for a while, watching the fire burn, neither of them saying anything. Finally, Serena spoke. Why are you here? Landon looked at her. What do you mean? This cabin, she said. Why are you fixing it? What's in it for you? Money, Landon said. And a job reference. That's it? That's it. She didn't look convinced. You're up here alone in the middle of nowhere, working on a cabin you don't own, for people you've probably never met. There has to be more to it than that. Landon stared into the fire. I've got a kid back in town. She's 6. I'm doing this so I can give her something stable. Serena was quiet for a moment. What's her name? Emma. Do you miss her? Every day. Serena nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Don't be, Landon said. She's got her aunt looking after her. She's fine. Still. They stood there for another few minutes, the fire burning between them, and then Landon turned and headed back toward the cabin. Come on, he said. There's more work to do. Serena followed. By the end of the first week, Serena had stopped asking questions and started learning. She learned how to split firewood without hitting her own foot. She learned how to sand down rough edges on the window frames without tearing up the wood. She learned that Landon didn't talk much, but when he did, it was because he had something worth saying. And Landon learned that Serena was tougher than she looked. She didn't complain about the cold, didn't whine about the outhouse, didn't ask for special treatment. She worked until her hands were raw, ate cold canned soup without comment, and fell asleep on the hard floor of the back bedroom without asking for a mattress. But she also had a temper. Landon discovered that on the 8th day, when the well pump failed, he was in the crawl space under the cabin trying to figure out why the water had stopped flowing when he heard Serena swearing above him. He crawled out, brushed the dirt off his jeans, and found her standing in the kitchen, holding an empty bucket. "What's wrong?" he asked. "The water's not working," she said. "I know. The pump's out. Can you fix it?" "I'm trying." "How long is it going to take?" "I don't know." She slammed the bucket down on the counter. "That's not an answer." Landon wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at her. "It's the only answer I've got." "This is insane," Serena said. "We're in the middle of nowhere with no running water, no heat, no phone service, and you don't even know if you can fix it?" "Welcome to the mountain," Landon said. She glared at him. "You think this is funny?" "No." "Then why are you smiling?" Landon realized he was. He didn't know why. Maybe because she looked so furious, so out of place, so completely unprepared for the reality of what her father had dumped her into. "I'm not smiling." "Yes, you are." "All right, fine. I am. But only because you're acting like this is my fault. Isn't it?" "No," Landon said. "The pump's 50 years old. It was going to fail eventually. I'm just the guy who has to fix it." Serena crossed her arms. "How much is it going to cost?" "I don't know yet." "Guess." "A few hundred. Maybe more." "Fine," she said. "I'll pay for it." "With what?" Landon asked. "You said your father cut off your credit cards." Her face went pale. You don't have any money, do you?" She didn't answer. Landon sighed. "It's fine. I'll cover it. The trust will reimburse me later." "I don't need your charity," Serena said. "It's not charity. It's the job." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she picked up the bucket and walked outside. Landon watched her go, then went back to the crawl space. It took him 3 days to fix the pump. 3 days of frozen hands, rusted bolts, and parts that had to be ordered from a supply shop 2 hours down the mountain. When the water finally started flowing again, Serena didn't thank him. She just filled the bucket, carried it inside, and went back to sanding the window frames. Landon didn't expect thanks. He wasn't doing this for her. But that night, when he came inside after chopping firewood, he found a plate of food waiting for him on the folding table. Canned stew, heated over the wood stove, with a piece of bread on the side. It wasn't much, but it was something. He ate it standing up, and when he was done, he washed the plate and left it on the counter. Serena didn't say anything, neither did he, but something had shifted. The snow came 2 weeks later, fast and heavy, turning the mountain into a wall of white. The road closed. The phone lines went dead. The only sound was the wind screaming through the trees like it was trying to tear the whole world apart. Landon had been through winters like this before. He knew how to ration food, how to keep the fire going, how to survive when the outside world disappeared. But Serena didn't, and he could see it in her eyes, the slow, creeping realization that she was trapped. "How long will the snow last?" she asked one night, staring out the window at the white blur beyond the glass. "Could be a week," Landon said. "Could be a month." "A month?" "Maybe longer." She didn't say anything after that, just stood there, watching the storm, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something together. Landon left her alone. But later that night, when the wind died down and the cabin was quiet, he heard her crying in the back room. Soft, muffled, like she didn't want him to hear. He thought about going to check on her, thought about saying something, but he didn't, because he knew that some things couldn't be fixed with words. The crying stopped after a while, but Landon didn't sleep. He lay in his sleeping bag near the wood stove, listening to the wind hammer against the cabin walls, listening to the fire crackle and pop, listening to the silence from the back room that felt heavier than any sound. He told himself it wasn't his problem. Serena Vale was a grown woman who'd gotten herself into this mess. And if she couldn't handle a little isolation and cold, that was on her, not him. But the truth was harder than that, and Landon knew it. The truth was that nobody deserved to be thrown away like garbage. Not even a billionaire who probably had more money in her bank account than he'd see in his entire life. Her father had sent her up here to break her, and Landon was starting to realize that maybe she was already halfway broken before she ever stepped out of that SUV. By morning, the snow had piled 3 feet high against the cabin door. Landon had to shove it open with his shoulder, pushing through the drift until he could wedge himself outside. The cold hit him like a fist, sharp and mean, and he pulled his jacket tighter as he waded through the snow toward the woodpile. The sky was gray, heavy with more storms waiting to drop, and the wind cut through the trees with a sound like knives scraping glass. He loaded his arms with firewood and hauled it back inside. Serena was awake, sitting at the folding table with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at a stack of papers she must have pulled from one of her suitcases. She didn't look up when he came in. Landon dumped the wood by the stove, brushed the snow off his jacket, and crouched down to feed the fire. "You eat yet?" "No." "There's oatmeal in the cupboard. I'm not hungry." He glanced over at her. She looked thinner than she had 2 weeks ago, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow. "You need to eat." I said I'm not hungry." Landon straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you looking at?" She finally looked up, her expression flat. "Legal documents." "About what?" "The cabin. The trust. My father's business." She pushed one of the papers across the table toward him. "Did you know this place is part of a shell company?" Landon walked over and picked up the paper. It was dense with legal jargon, the kind of thing that made his head hurt just looking at it. "What's a shell company?" "A fake business," Serena said. "Something you set up to hide money or assets. My father uses them all the time." "This cabin?" "It's not owned by the Vale Family Trust. It's owned by a company called Ridge Summit Holdings, which is owned by another company, which is owned by the trust. It's layers, all designed to keep people from figuring out what's really going on." Landon set the paper down. "Why would he do that?" "Because he's hiding something," Serena said. "I just don't know what yet." "And you think it's got something to do with this cabin?" "I think it's got something to do with why he sent me here." She leaned back in her chair, pulling the blanket tighter. "My father doesn't do anything without a reason. He didn't send me up here to teach me a lesson. He sent me up here to get me out of the way." "Out of the way of what?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Landon pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "You think he's doing something illegal?" "I think he's doing something dangerous," Serena said. "And I think he doesn't want me anywhere near it when it blows up." "So what are you going to do?" She looked at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Landon saw something in her eyes that wasn't anger or exhaustion. It was determination. "I'm going to find out what he's hiding, and then I'm going to use it against him." Landon nodded slowly. "All right. All right. Yeah, you want to take down your old man, that's your business. Just don't drag me into it." Serena almost smiled. Almost. "Fair enough." They sat there for a moment, the fire crackling between them, and then Landon stood up. "I'm going to check the generator. Storm might have knocked something loose. Do you need help?" "No," and he grabbed his jacket and headed back outside, leaving her alone with her papers and her plans. The generator was in a shed behind the cabin, buried under 2 feet of snow. Landon dug it out with a shovel, his hands going numb despite his gloves, and pulled open the shed door. The generator was still running, chugging along like it had been for the past week, but the exhaust vent was clogged with ice. He cleared it out, checked the fuel level, and made sure the connections were tight. Everything looked fine, but something in his gut told him it wouldn't stay that way. He trudged back to the cabin, stomping the snow off his boots before heading inside. Serena was still at the table, scribbling notes on the back of one of the legal documents. Landon hung up his jacket and poured himself a cup of water from the jug on the counter. "Generator's fine. he said. Good. But we're going to run out of fuel in about a week if this snow keeps up. Serena looked up. Can you get more? Not until the road opens. And when will that be? Could be tomorrow. Could be next month. She set down her pen. So, what do? We ration, Landon said. Turn the generator off at night, use the wood stove for heat, and hope the storm breaks before we freeze. Serena stared at him. That's your plan? You got a better one? She didn't answer. Landon drained his cup and set it on the counter. Look, I've done this before. It's not fun, but it's survivable. You just have to be smart about it. And if we're not smart about it, then we die. Serena's face went pale, but she didn't look away. You really think it could get that bad? I think the mountain doesn't care who you are or how much money your family has, Landon said. Up here, you're just another person trying not to freeze to death. So yeah, it could get that bad. She nodded slowly, like she was trying to absorb the weight of what he'd just said. Then she picked up her pen and went back to her notes. Landon watched her for a moment, then grabbed the oatmeal from the cupboard and started making breakfast. If she wasn't going to eat, he'd make her eat, because he'd be damned if he let her starve herself to death on his watch. When the oatmeal was ready, he poured it into 2 bowls and set one in front of her. Eat. I told you. I don't care what you told me. Eat. She looked at the bowl, then at him, and for a second, he thought she was going to argue. But instead, she picked up the spoon and took a bite. Then another. And another. By the time she finished, the bowl was empty, and there was a little color back in her face. Better? Landon asked. Yeah, she said quietly. Better. He nodded and took her bowl to the counter, washing it along with his own. When he turned back around, Serena was staring at the window, watching the snow fall in thick, relentless sheets. How long have you been doing this? She asked. Doing what? Living like this, working on places like this. Landon leaned against the counter, arms crossed. About 10 years, started right after Emma was born. Why? Because I needed the money and I was good at it. And you don't mind being alone? I'm not alone, Landon said. I've got Emma. But she's not here. No, she's not. Serena turned to look at him. Do you ever regret it, taking jobs like this? Landon thought about it. Sometimes. But regret doesn't pay the bills. She nodded, like she understood, and went back to staring at the snow. Landon left her alone and went to work on the window frames in the front room. The wood was old and brittle, and half the panes were cracked or missing. He'd already replaced 3 of them, but there were 6 more to go, and the cold made the work slow. His fingers kept going numb, and the putty wouldn't set right in the freezing air, but he pushed through it anyway. Because if he stopped, he'd start thinking, and thinking was dangerous up here. Serena appeared in the doorway an hour later, still wrapped in her blanket. Can I help? You know how to set a window pane? No. Then you'll slow me down. Teach me. Landon looked at her, surprised. Why? Because I'm going insane sitting at that table, she said. And because if I'm going to be stuck up here, I might as well learn something useful. He considered it, then nodded. All right, come here. She walked over and he handed her a putty knife. You're going to spread this along the frame, right where the glass sits. Not too thick, not too thin, just enough to hold it in place. That's it? That's it. But if you mess it up, the glass won't seal, and the cold will get in. Serena took the knife and crouched down next to the window frame. She scooped a glob of putty from the can and started spreading it along the wood, her movements careful and deliberate. Landon watched her work, ready to step in if she screwed it up, but she didn't. The putty went on smooth and even, just like he'd shown her. Good, he said. She looked up at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Really? Yeah. Now do the rest. They worked together for the next 2 hours, Serena spreading putty and Landon setting the glass panes into place. She didn't talk much, just focused on the task, and Landon found himself appreciating the quiet. Most people couldn't handle silence. They filled it with noise, with questions, with meaningless chatter. But Serena was different. She knew when to shut up and let the work speak for itself. By the time they finished, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the snow. Landon stepped back and looked at the window. It wasn't perfect. There were a few spots where the putty was a little uneven, but it was solid. It would hold. "Not bad," he said. Serena stood up, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Thanks." "For what?" "For letting me help." Landon shrugged. "You did the work. I just told you how." She smiled, just a little, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her since she'd arrived. It didn't last long, just a second, maybe two, but it was there and it made her look like a completely different person. That night, after they'd eaten and the fire was banked for the evening, Serena pulled out more of her legal documents and spread them across the table. Landon sat on the floor near the stove, sharpening his knife, half listening as she muttered to herself about shell companies and offshore accounts and corporate liability. "You ever think about just walking away?" he asked. She looked up. "From what?" "All of it. Your family, the money, the legal battles. Just walking away and starting over." Serena was quiet for a long moment. "Every day." "So why don't you?" "Because if I walk away, he wins," she said, "and I'm not going to let him win." Landon nodded. He understood that. Pride was a hell of a motivator. "What's he done to you?" "What hasn't he done?" Serena said bitterly. "He's controlled every part of my life since I was a kid. Who I talked to, where I went to school, what job I was allowed to have. And when I finally tried to do something on my own, when I tried to build something that wasn't his, he tore it apart and told me I was ungrateful." "What did you try to build?" "A charity," she said, "for kids who aged out of foster care. I used my own money, my own time, and it was working. We helped hundreds of kids find housing, find jobs, find a future, and then my father found out I was using Vail family connections to raise funds, and he shut it down. Told the board I was embezzling, told the press I was incompetent, destroyed everything I'd worked for in less than a week." Landon set down his knife. "That's brutal. That's my father. And now you're here. And now I'm here," Serena said. "Exiled to a mountain cabin because I had the audacity to stand up to him at a board meeting. He told me if I wanted to pretend I could survive on my own, he'd give me the chance. 6 months on this mountain with no money, no connections, no help. If I make it through the winter, he'll consider letting me back into the family business. If I don't..." "You don't what?" "I don't know," she said. "He didn't tell me. Maybe I just disappear." Landon stared at her. "You think he'd actually hurt you?" "I think he'd do whatever it takes to protect his empire," Serena said. "And if that means getting rid of me, then yeah, he'd hurt me." The cabin was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Landon picked up his knife again, testing the edge with his thumb. "Then we make sure you survive." Serena looked at him, her eyes wide. "Why would you help me?" "Because your father's an asshole," Landon said. "And because you're not as useless as you think you are." She laughed, sharp and sudden, and it echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. "That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in years. Don't get used to it." She went back to her papers, and Landon went back to sharpening his knife, and the night settled in around them like a heavy blanket. The next morning, the well pump failed again. Landon was outside chopping firewood when he heard Serena yelling from inside the cabin. He dropped the axe and ran up the porch steps, pushing through the door to find her standing in the kitchen, water pooling around her feet. "What happened?" he asked. "The pipe burst," she said, pointing at the wall. Water was spraying from a crack in the old copper pipe, soaking the floor and the lower half of the wall. "I turned on the faucet, and it just exploded." Landon swore under his breath and ran back outside to the crawl space. He found the main shutoff valve and cranked it closed, cutting off the water flow. The spraying stopped, but the damage was already done. He crawled back out and went inside to survey the mess. Serena was on her hands and knees trying to mop up the water with towels. "I'm sorry, she said. "I didn't know." "It's not your fault," Landon said. "The pipes are ancient. They were going to go eventually." "Can you fix it?" "Yeah, but it's going to take time, and I don't have the parts up here. So what do? "We haul water from the creek," Landon said, "and we pray the snow melts before we run out of buckets." Serena looked at him, her face pale. The creek? In this weather? You got a better idea? She didn't. For the next 3 days, they hauled water. Landon led the way, trudging through waist-deep snow to the creek, a quarter-mile from the cabin, and Serena followed, carrying empty buckets that felt like they weighed 100 pounds by the time they made it back. The work was brutal. The cold bit through their gloves. The snow soaked through their boots, and the wind screamed at them like it was trying to drive them back inside. But they kept going because the alternative was dying of thirst. On the third day, Serena's hands were so raw and blistered that she could barely grip the bucket handle. Landon saw her wince as she set the bucket down on the cabin floor, saw the way she cradled her hands against her chest, and he grabbed her wrist before she could pull away. "Let me see," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Let me see." She hesitated, then uncurled her fingers. The skin was red and cracked, bleeding in places where the blisters had burst. Landon swore under his breath and went to his first aid kit, pulling out a roll of gauze and a tube of ointment. "Sit down," he said. Serena sat at the table and Landon knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. He spread the ointment over the blisters, his touch careful and gentle, and then wrapped her hands in gauze. She didn't say anything, just watched him work, her breath coming slow and steady. "You should have told me it was this bad," Landon said. "I didn't want to slow you down." "You're not slowing me down." "I feel like I am." Landon looked up at her. "You're hauling water through a blizzard with blistered hands and frozen feet, and you haven't complained once. That's not slowing me down. That's keeping up." Serena's eyes glistened, and for a second Landon thought she might cry. But she didn't. She just nodded, her jaw tight, and pulled her hands back. "Thank you. Don't mention it." He stood up and put the first aid kit away, and Serena stayed at the table, staring at her bandaged hands. Landon went back outside to chop more firewood, and when he came back in an hour later, he found a pot of soup heating on the wood stove and Serena asleep at the table, her head resting on her arms. He didn't wake her, just ladled out a bowl of soup, ate it standing up, and then threw a blanket over her shoulders before heading to bed. The snow finally stopped 4 days later, but the damage was done. The road was buried under 6 feet of drifts, the phone lines were down, and the generator was running on fumes. Landon did the math in his head and figured they had maybe 3 more days of fuel, maybe 4 if they were careful. After that, they'd be running on the wood stove alone. He told Serena the news over breakfast, and she took it better than he expected. "So we ration the generator," she said. "Turn it off during the day, only use it at night for the lights." "That's the plan." "And if we run out of fuel before the road opens?" "Then we make do." She nodded, like she'd already accepted it, and went back to her legal documents. Landon watched her for a moment, impressed despite himself, and then went outside to check the perimeter. The snow had drifted against the cabin walls, piling up so high that it nearly reached the windows. He spent the next 2 hours digging it out, his back screaming and his hands going numb, but he didn't stop. Because if the snow collapsed the walls, they were both dead. Serena came out to help halfway through, and together they cleared the worst of it. By the time they finished, the sun was setting, casting the snow in shades of pink and gold. They stood there for a moment, breathing hard, their breath fogging in the cold air. "It's beautiful, Serena said. Landon looked at her surprised. "What is?" "This." She gestured at the mountains, the snow, the sky, all of it. "It's brutal and terrifying, and it's trying to kill us, but it's also beautiful." Landon followed her gaze. He'd been looking at these mountains for months now, but he'd stopped seeing them somewhere along the way. Now standing next to Serena, he saw them again. The way the light caught the peaks, the way the snow sparkled like broken glass, the way the whole world seemed to hold its breath in the cold. "Yeah," he said quietly, "it is." They went back inside, and Landon started the fire while Serena made dinner. They ate in silence, too tired to talk, and then Serena pulled out her papers again while Landon sat by the stove, mending a tear in his jacket. "I think I found it," Serena said suddenly. Landon looked up. "Found what?" "The deal my father's hiding." She held up one of the documents, her hand shaking. "It's a land acquisition. He's buying up property all along this ridge, thousands of acres, and he's doing it through shell companies, so nobody can trace it back to him." Why would he do that? Because he's planning to sell it, Serena said, to a mining company. They want to strip mine the whole mountain for rare earth minerals, and my father's the middleman. He buys the land cheap, sells it to the mining company for 10 times what he paid, and walks away with hundreds of millions of dollars. Landon set down his jacket. What happens to the people who live here? They get evicted, Serena said. The mining company tears down their homes, destroys the land, and leaves nothing but a pit. And my father doesn't care because by the time anyone figures out what he's done, he'll be long gone. And you think that's why he sent you up here? I know it is, Serena said. He needed me out of the way while he finalized the deal. If I was still in the city, I would have found out, and I would have stopped him. But up here, I'm just another casualty. Landon stared at her. So what are you going to do? Serena's eyes hardened. I'm going to burn his deal to the ground. Landon didn't sleep that night. He lay in his sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, listening to Serena shuffle papers at the table like she was building a case that could take down an empire. Maybe she was. He didn't know enough about corporate law or land deals or mining companies to say whether what she'd found was enough. But he knew one thing for sure. If her father was willing to exile her to a frozen mountain just to keep her quiet, then whatever she'd uncovered was dangerous as hell. And danger had a way of finding people, even up here. By morning, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows and shaking the cabin walls. Landon got up, fed the fire, and made coffee from the last of the grounds he'd been rationing. It was weak and bitter, but it was hot, and that was all that mattered. He poured a cup for Serena and set it on the table next to her stack of documents. She looked up, her eyes red and tired. Thanks. You been up all night? Most of it. You need to sleep. I need to finish this, Iti, she said, gesturing at the papers. If I can map out the entire acquisition chain, I can prove my father's involvement. And if I can prove it, I can stop the sale. Landon sat down across from her, cradling his own cup. How are you going to stop it? You don't have a phone, no internet, no way to contact anyone. I'll figure it out when the road opens. And what if it doesn't open in time? Serena's jaw tightened. Then I'll find another way. Landon studied her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the stubborn set of her mouth, the way her hands trembled just slightly as she picked up her coffee. She looked like she was running on fumes and sheer willpower, and he wondered how long she could keep that up before she crashed. You really think you can take him down? He asked. I have to. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got. Landon nodded slowly. All right, then what do you need from me? Serena looked surprised. Nothing. This isn't your fight. Maybe not, Landon said. But I'm stuck up here same as you, and if your old man's planning to blow up this mountain for profit, that affects me too. So what do you need? She was quiet for a moment, like she was trying to figure out if he was serious. Then she said, I need you to help me understand the property lines. The documents reference survey maps and elevation markers, but I don't know how to read them. If you can help me map out what land he's actually bought, I can figure out what he's planning. I can do that. You sure? I've been reading survey maps since I was 16, Landon said. It's part of the job. Serena's shoulders sagged a little, like she'd been carrying a weight she didn't realize she could share. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Let's see if we can actually figure this out first. They spent the next 3 hours bent over the table, Serena pointing out legal descriptions, and Landon translating them into actual geography. The property her father had acquired stretched across nearly 15,000 acres, covering most of the ridge and the valleys below. It was a massive land grab, the kind of thing that should have raised red flags with every regulatory agency in the state, but somehow it had slipped through without anyone noticing. How did he get away with this? Landon asked, tapping one of the documents. Buying up this much land without anyone asking questions? Shell companies, Serena said. Each purchase was made by a different entity, all of them registered in different states, all of them owned by other shell companies. On paper, it looks like a dozen unrelated buyers acquiring small parcels of land. Nobody realizes it's all going to the same person. That's legal? Technically, yes. Unethical as hell, but legal. Landon shook his head. Your father's a piece of work. He's a criminal, Serena said flatly. He just hasn't been caught yet. They kept working, mapping out the acquisitions, cross-referencing the legal documents with the survey maps Landon had on file for the cabin restoration project. By the time they finished, they had a rough outline of the entire operation. The mining company, Cordova Extraction, according to the contracts, was planning to start operations within 6 months. They'd already filed environmental impact statements, mineral rights claims, and preliminary permits. Everything was in place. All they needed was the land transfer to go through, and they'd own the mountain. "We have to stop this," Serena said, staring at the map they'd drawn. "If they start mining, it'll destroy everything. The forest, the water table, the wildlife. And the people who live down in the valley, they'll lose their homes, their livelihoods, everything." "How many people live down there, Landon?" Landon asked. "I don't know, a few hundred, maybe more. Small towns, family farms, places that have been there for generations." She looked up at him. "They don't even know what's coming." Landon felt something cold settle in his chest. He thought about Emma, safe in town with her aunt, and he thought about what it would be like if someone just showed up one day and told her she had to leave, that her home was being torn down for profit. The thought made him sick. "So what's the plan?" he asked. "I need to get this information to someone who can do something with it," Serena said. "A journalist, a lawyer, someone with enough influence to blow the whistle before the deal closes. But I can't do that from up here. The road's still closed." "I know. And even if it opens tomorrow, you don't have a car." "I'll walk if I have to." Landon looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You can't walk 15 miles through snow and ice with no supplies. You'd die before you made it halfway." "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest we wait," Landon said. "The storm's going to break eventually. When it does, the road will open and we'll get you down the mountain. But you're not going anywhere until it's safe." Serena's face twisted with frustration. "Every day we wait is another day closer to the deal closing. I don't have time to sit around and hope the weather improves." "You don't have a choice." "There's always a choice." "Not this time," Landon said, his voice hard. "You try to leave now, you'll end up frozen in a ditch, and all this work you've done will be for nothing. So you're going to wait, and you're going to trust me when I tell you it's the right call." Serena glared at him, her hands clenched into fists, and for a second Landon thought she was going to argue. But then she let out a long breath and slumped back in her chair. "Fine, we wait." "Good." They didn't talk much after that. Serena went back to her papers, and Landon went outside to check the generator. The fuel tank was almost empty, just like he'd feared. He did the math again and figured they had maybe 2 more days, 3 if they stretched it. After that, they'd be down to the wood stove and whatever daylight made it through the windows. He stood there for a long time, staring at the empty fuel gauge, and then he heard footsteps crunching through the snow behind him. He turned to find Serena standing a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad. How long do we have?" 2 days, maybe 3. She nodded, like she'd been expecting it. "What happens when it runs out?" "We get cold," Landon said. "Really cold. The wood stove will keep the main room warm, but the rest of the cabin will freeze. We'll have to sleep near the fire, ration the firewood, and hope the snow melts before we run out. And if it doesn't, then we're in trouble." Serena was quiet for a moment, her breath fogging in the air. "I'm sorry." Landon frowned. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. For being here. For making everything harder than it needs to be." "You didn't drag me into anything," Landon said. "I signed up for this job. And you're not making things harder. You're just here." Still. He looked at her, really looked at her, and he saw something in her face that he hadn't seen before. Guilt. She felt guilty for being here, for existing, for taking up space. And Landon realized that she'd probably been carrying that guilt her whole life, told over and over by her father and everyone else in her world that she was a burden, a problem, something to be managed and controlled. "You don't have to apologize for existing," he said quietly. Serena's eyes glistened, and she looked away. "Sometimes it feels like I do." "Well, you don't, not to me." She didn't say anything, just stood there in the snow, and Landon turned back to the generator. He heard her footsteps retreat toward the cabin, and then the door closed, and he was alone again. That night, The temperature dropped below zero. Landon woke up shivering, his sleeping bag damp with condensation, and the fire in the wood stove had burned down to embers. He got up, added more logs, and stoked it back to life. But the cold had already seeped into the walls, into the floor, into his bones. He checked the back bedroom and found Serena curled up under every blanket she owned, her teeth chattering. "Come out here," he said. She looked up at him, her face pale. "What?" "It's warmer by the fire. Bring your blankets." She didn't argue, just gathered up her blankets and followed him to the main room. Landon spread out his sleeping bag near the stove and gestured for her to do the same. She hesitated, then laid out her blankets next to his, close enough that they could share the heat, but far enough that it didn't feel weird. They lay there in silence, the fire crackling between them, and Landon could hear her breathing, slow and uneven, like she was trying not to cry. "You all right?" he asked. "No." "What's wrong?" "Everything," she said, her voice breaking. "This whole thing. My father, the deal, the cabin, the cold. I don't know if I can do this." Landon turned his head to look at her. "You've made it this far. That doesn't mean I can make it the rest of the way." "Yes, it does," Landon said. "You're stronger than you think." "How do you know?" "Because you're still here. Most people would have quit by now." Serena laughed, bitter and sharp. "I don't have anywhere else to go." "That's not true." "Yes, it is. If I leave, my father wins. If I stay, I might freeze to death. Either way, I lose." "You're not going to freeze to death," Landon said. "I won't let that happen." She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why do you care?" Landon didn't have a good answer for that. He didn't know why he cared. Maybe it was because she reminded him of himself, back when Emma was born, and he was trying to figure out how to be a father with no money and no support. Maybe it was because he hated bullies, and her father was the worst kind of bully. Or maybe it was just because she was here, and he was here, and they were both trying to survive the same storm. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I do." Serena's face softened, and she reached out, her hand brushing against his. It was just a touch, barely there, but it sent a jolt through Landon's chest that he hadn't felt in years. He didn't pull away, and neither did she. They just lay there, their hands touching, the fire burning between them, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the cabin didn't feel so cold. By morning, the generator was dead. Landon checked it twice, cranked the starter until his arm ached, but it wouldn't turn over. They were out of fuel. He told Serena the news over breakfast, and she took it better than he expected. "So we're on the wood stove now," she said. "Yeah." "How long will the firewood last?" "If we're careful, maybe 2 weeks. Maybe less if the temperature keeps dropping." "And then?" "Then we start burning furniture." Serena almost smiled. "You're joking." "I'm not." They spent the rest of the day rationing firewood, feeding the stove just enough to keep the main room warm and letting the rest of the cabin freeze. Landon sealed off the back bedroom with blankets to trap the heat, and they moved all their supplies into the main room. It felt like they were hunkering down for a siege, and in a way, they were. The storm hit that night, worse than anything they'd seen so far. The wind screamed through the trees, tearing branches off and hurling them against the cabin. The snow fell so thick that Landon couldn't see the woodpile from the window. He kept the fire going, feeding it log after log. But the cold kept creeping in, seeping through the cracks in the walls, through the gaps around the door, through the floor itself. Serena sat at the table, wrapped in blankets, working on her documents by candlelight. Landon sat near the stove, sharpening his knife, and neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. The storm was louder than words, louder than thought, and all they could do was wait it out. Around midnight, Landon noticed Serena swaying in her chair. Her head was drooping, her eyes half closed, and the pen slipped from her fingers. He stood up and walked over to her. "You need to sleep," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausted." "I just need to finish this section." Landon took the papers from her hands and set them on the table. "It'll still be there tomorrow. Come on." He helped her to her feet and guided her over to the sleeping bags near the fire. She sank down onto the blankets, too tired to argue, and Landon pulled the extra blankets over her. She was asleep in seconds, her breathing slow and steady, and Landon sat down next to her, watching the fire burn. He didn't know how long he sat there. Could have been an hour, could have been 3, but at some point he heard a noise that didn't belong. It was faint, barely audible over the storm, but it was there, a hissing sound like air escaping from a tire. Landon stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. He couldn't see anything through the snow, but the sound was getting louder. He grabbed his flashlight and opened the door, stepping out into the storm. The wind hit him like a fist, nearly knocking him off the porch, but he braced himself and scanned the clearing with the flashlight beam. The generator shed. The door was hanging open, swinging in the wind, and smoke was billowing out from inside. Landon ran. He reached the shed and yanked the door all the way open, shining the flashlight inside. The generator was still dead, but the exhaust vent had come loose, and carbon monoxide was pouring out into the shed. He grabbed the vent and tried to reattach it, but the metal was frozen solid, and his gloves kept slipping. He ripped them off and gripped the vent with his bare hands, ignoring the way the cold burned his skin, and forced it back into place. But the damage was already done. The exhaust had been leaking into the shed for hours, and the wind had been pushing it back toward the cabin. Landon's head was already spinning, his vision blurring at the edges, and he stumbled out of the shed, gasping for air. He needed to check the cabin. He staggered back through the snow, his legs unsteady, and pushed through the cabin door. The main room was hazy, a thin layer of smoke hanging in the air, and Serena was still lying by the fire, unmoving. Landon's heart stopped. He ran to her, dropping to his knees, and grabbed her shoulder. Serena, wake up." She didn't move. He shook her harder, his hands trembling. "Come on, wake up, please." Her eyes fluttered open, just barely, and she looked at him with a dazed, confused expression. "What?" "We have to get out," Landon said. "The cabin's filled with carbon monoxide. We have to get out now." He tried to pull her to her feet, but she was too weak, her legs buckling under her. Landon hooked his arms under hers and dragged her toward the door, his own vision swimming, his lungs burning. He got her onto the porch and then down the steps, into the snow, and he collapsed next to her, both of them gasping for air. The storm tore at them, the wind screaming, the snow stinging their faces. Landon forced himself to his feet, grabbed Serena under the arms, and dragged her away from the cabin, away from the smoke, toward the woodpile where the air was clearer. He propped her up against the stack of logs and checked her pulse. It was there, weak and thready, but there. "Stay with me," he said, his voice raw. "Don't you dare give up on me now." Serena's eyes flickered open, and she coughed, her whole body shaking. "What happened?" "Carbon monoxide, Landon said. "The exhaust vent came loose. The cabin's full of it." "We can't go back inside?" "Not until it clears out." She looked at him, her face pale, her lips turning blue. "How long will that take?" "I don't know. Maybe an hour. Maybe more. We'll freeze out here. I know." Landon looked around, trying to think, trying to figure out how to keep them alive. The cabin was poisoned. The shed was worse. The only shelter they had was the woodpile, and that wouldn't protect them from the wind. They needed a fire, but he couldn't build one in the storm. And then he saw it. The tarp. He'd used it to cover the lumber pile, and it was still there, weighted down with rocks. If he could get it off, he could use it to build a windbreak. He ran to the lumber pile, his hands numb, and started pulling the rocks off the tarp. They were frozen to the fabric, and he had to pry them loose, his fingers screaming in pain. But he got them off, one by one, and then he yanked the tarp free and dragged it back to Serena. "Help me," he said. She pushed herself up, her movements slow and clumsy, and together they stretched the tarp between the woodpile and a cluster of trees, creating a crude shelter. It wasn't much, but it blocked the worst of the wind, and that was enough. Landon grabbed an armful of firewood and started building a fire in the snow, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the lighter. The first 3 tries failed. The wind kept blowing out the flame, but on the 4th try the kindling caught and the fire started to grow. Landon fed it carefully, adding larger pieces of wood, building it up until it was big enough to give off real heat. Serena crawled closer to the fire, her teeth chattering, and Landon sat down next to her, wrapping his arms around her to share what little warmth he had left. They sat there for what felt like hours, the fire burning in front of them, the storm raging around them, and Landon kept checking Serena's pulse, kept making sure she was still breathing. "I'm sorry," she said at some point, her voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it. "For what?" "For all of this. For being here. For almost getting us both killed. That wasn't your fault." "It feels like it is." Landon tightened his arms around her. "We're alive. That's what matters." "Are we?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that broke his heart. "Are we really alive, or are we just dying slower?" "We're alive," Landon said, "and we're going to stay that way." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he felt her breathing slow, felt her body relax just a little. The fire crackled and popped, and the storm screamed, and Landon held her there in the snow, refusing to let go. He didn't know how long they stayed like that. The storm made time meaningless, stretching seconds into hours and hours into days. But eventually, the wind started to die down, and the snow stopped falling, and the sky began to lighten with the faint gray glow of dawn. Landon forced himself to stand, his legs stiff and aching, and walked back to the cabin. He opened the door carefully, testing the air, and found that the smoke had cleared. The carbon monoxide was gone, vented out through the cracks and gaps, and the cabin was safe again. He went back to Serena and helped her to her feet. She could barely walk, her legs shaking, her face pale as snow, but she leaned on him, and together they made it back inside. Landon got the fire going again, fed it until the room was warm, and then he wrapped Serena in every blanket he could find. "Rest," he said. "I'm okay." "You're not okay. Rest." She didn't argue, just closed her eyes and let herself sink into the blankets, and within minutes she was asleep. Landon sat down at the table, his hands still trembling, and stared at the stack of legal documents Serena had been working on. They were covered in notes, diagrams, calculations, all written in her careful handwriting. She'd been building a case, piece by piece, trying to save a mountain and the people who lived on it, and she'd almost died doing it. And Landon realized, sitting there in the quiet cabin with the fire crackling and Serena breathing softly nearby, that he would do whatever it took to make sure she finished what she'd started, because she deserved that much. And so did the mountain. Serena slept for 14 hours straight. Landon checked on her every hour, making sure she was still breathing, still warm, still alive. Each time he found her chest rising and falling steadily, he felt something loosen in his own chest, something that had been wound too tight since he'd dragged her out of that smoke-filled cabin. When she finally woke up, it was late afternoon and the light coming through the windows was thin and gray. She sat up slowly, wincing, and Landon looked over from where he'd been repairing the exhaust vent. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I got hit by a truck." Her voice was hoarse, raw. "What happened to your hands?" Landon looked down. His fingers were wrapped in bandages, the skin underneath blistered and torn from fighting with frozen metal in the middle of the storm. "Frostbite." "It's not bad." "That's bad, Landon. I've had worse." She pushed herself to her feet, swaying a little, and walked over to him. Without asking, she took his hands in hers and carefully unwrapped the bandages. The skin was angry red in places, white and waxy in others, and some of the blisters had burst. She made a small sound in the back of her throat. "We need to rewrap these properly," she said. "They're fine." "They're not fine. Sit down." Landon sat. Serena went to the first aid kit and came back with clean gauze, antibiotic ointment, and medical tape. She knelt in front of him and took his right hand first, cleaning the wounds with a gentleness he hadn't expected. Her own hands were still bandaged from hauling water, but she worked carefully, methodically, like she'd done this before. "Where'd you learn first aid?" he asked. "My mother," Serena said quietly. "Before she died, she used to volunteer at a free clinic. She'd come home and practice on me, teaching me how to clean wounds, how to wrap bandages, how to check for signs of infection. She said everyone should know how to take care of people." "How old were you when she died?" 12. Landon watched her work, saw the way her jaw tightened when she said it, the way her hands moved a little faster like she was trying to outrun the memory. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." "Doesn't make it easier." She finished wrapping his right hand and moved to his left. No, it doesn't. They were quiet for a while, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the wind still moaning outside. When Serena finished, she sat back on her heels and looked up at him. "You saved my life," she said. "You would have done the same." "I don't know if I would have. I don't know if I could have." Landon pulled his hands back, flexing his fingers carefully. "You're stronger than you think." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." Serena stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't woken up, if you hadn't noticed the exhaust leak. We'd both be dead right now. But we're not. But we could have been. And for what? So my father can sell this mountain to a mining company? So he can make another few $100 million he doesn't need?" Her voice cracked. "It's not worth it. None of this is worth dying for." Landon stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered ridge. "You're wrong." "How am I wrong?" "Because it's not about your father," Landon said. "It's about the people down in that valley who don't know what's coming. It's about the land itself. It's about doing the right thing even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when nobody's going to thank you for it." He turned to look at her. "That's worth dying for." Serena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "I don't want you to die for this. I'm not planning on it. Neither was I, but we almost did." "Almost doesn't count," Landon said. "We're still here, we're still fighting, and we're going to finish this." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing dirt across her cheek. "How?" "We don't have fuel, we're running out of firewood, and the road's still closed. Even if I finish mapping out my father's entire operation, I can't do anything with it from up here." "Then we get you down the mountain. You said it was too dangerous." "It was, in the middle of a blizzard. But the storm's breaking. Look!" He pointed out the window. The snow had stopped falling, and patches of blue sky were starting to show through the clouds. "Give it another day or two for the drifts to settle, and I can get you out." "How?" "Snowshoes. It's 15 miles to the main road. If we start early and move fast, we can make it before dark." Serena stared at him. "That's insane." "Yeah, it is, but it's the only option we've got." She was quiet for a long moment, chewing on her lower lip, thinking. Finally, she nodded. "All right, let's do it." "You sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." Landon almost smiled. "Good. Then we need to get ready." They spent the next 2 days preparing for the hike. Landon dug out his old snowshoes from the storage shed and fashioned a second pair from scrap wood and paracord. They weren't pretty, but they'd work. He rationed their remaining food, packing enough for the journey with a little extra in case they got delayed. He checked the weather obsessively, watching the sky for any sign of another storm, but it stayed clear. Serena worked on her documents, organizing everything into a single folder that she could carry down the mountain. She wrote out a detailed summary of the land acquisition, the shell companies, the mining operation, everything she'd uncovered. It was 20 pages of dense legal analysis, and she read it aloud to Landon one night by the fire, making sure he understood what she'd found. "So your father's been buying up land through these fake companies for the past 2 years," Landon said when she finished. "And once he owns enough, he's going to flip it to Cordova Extraction for a massive profit." "Right. But the real crime isn't the land sale. It's the environmental violations. Cordova's environmental impact statement is full of lies. They're claiming the mining operation will have minimal impact on the local water table, but their own internal documents show they know it'll contaminate the aquifer for decades. My father has copies of those documents. He's seen them. And he's selling the land anyway. That's criminal." "It should be. But proving it is the hard part. I need to get these documents to someone who can investigate, someone with the authority to stop the sale before it goes through." She looked at him. "Do you know anyone like that?" Landon thought about it. "There's a guy I worked with a few years back, environmental lawyer. He used to take on cases against mining companies, big corporate polluters, that kind of thing. Last I heard, he was working for a nonprofit out of the state capital." "Can you contact him?" "Once we get down the mountain, yeah. If he's still doing that kind of work, he might be able to help." Serena's face lit up with something that looked almost like hope. "That could work." "Don't get ahead of yourself. He might say no. Or he might not have the resources to take on something this big. But it's a chance. It's a chance, Landon agreed. That night, they lay near the fire again, wrapped in their blankets, and Serena asked him about Emma. It was the first time she'd brought her up since that first week, and Landon found himself talking more than he'd planned. He told her about the day Emma was born, how he'd been so scared he could barely hold her. He told her about the first time Emma had called him dad, how it had made him cry even though he'd tried to hide it. He told her about the way she laughed, the way she asked a million questions about everything, the way she made him want to be better than he was. She sounds amazing, Serena said. She is. Do you think she's okay? Down in town without you? I hope so. Her aunt's good with her. Better than I am, probably. I doubt that. Landon turned his head to look at her. Why? Because you're the kind of person who drags someone out of a burning building in the middle of a blizzard. That's the kind of father any kid would be lucky to have. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. Just lay there in this firelight, listening to the wind outside, and thought about what it would be like to see Emma again. To hold her and tell her he was sorry for being gone so long. To show her that he'd made it through, that he'd survived, that he'd kept his promise to come home. The next morning, Landon woke up before dawn and checked the weather one last time. The sky was clear, the wind was calm, and the temperature had risen just enough to make travel possible. It was now or never. He woke Serena gently, and she sat up, rubbing her eyes. Is it time? Yeah. They ate a quick breakfast of canned beans and stale bread, packed their supplies into 2 backpacks, and strapped on the snowshoes. Landon checked the cabin one last time, making sure the fire was out and the door was secure, and then they stepped outside into the snow. The world was white and silent, the kind of silence that felt almost holy. Landon led the way, breaking trail through the drifts, and Serena followed close behind. The snowshoes were awkward at first, making her stumble every few steps, but she got the hang of it quickly, matching his rhythm, keeping pace. They walked for hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky, the snow glittering like broken glass. Landon's hands ached inside his gloves, the frostbite burning with every movement, but he didn't slow down. They couldn't afford to. They had 15 miles to cover, and if they didn't make it to the main road before dark, they'd be in serious trouble. Around noon, they stopped to rest. Serena sat down on a fallen log, breathing hard, her face flushed. Landon handed her a water bottle, and she drank deeply. How much farther? She asked. About halfway. She groaned. My legs are killing me. You're doing good. I don't feel like I'm doing good. You're still moving. That's what matters. They rested for 10 minutes, then got back up and kept going. The trail got steeper as they descended the ridge, and Landon had to slow down, testing each step carefully to make sure the snow wasn't hiding ice underneath. Serena slipped once, catching herself on a tree branch, and Landon grabbed her arm to steady her. You all right? He asked. Yeah, just clumsy. Watch where you plant your feet. The drifts are deeper here. She nodded and kept moving, more cautious now, and they made it down the steep section without any more incidents. By mid-afternoon, they reached the valley, and Landon could see the main road in the distance, a dark ribbon cutting through the white landscape. Almost there, he said. Serena looked up, her eyes bright. Thank God. They pushed forward, covering the last few miles faster than Landon had expected. The road was plowed, the snow pushed into high banks on either side, and there were tire tracks in the slush. Someone had been through here recently. They were back in the world. Landon pulled off his snowshoes and sat down on the side of the road, exhausted. Serena collapsed next to him, leaning her head back and closing her eyes. We made it, she said. Yeah, we did. They sat there for a while, catching their breath, and then Landon stood up and started flagging down passing cars. The third one stopped, a pickup truck driven by an older man with a gray beard and kind eyes. You folks need a ride? He asked. Yeah, Landon said. We've been stuck up on the ridge. Can you take us to town? Sure thing. Hop in. They climbed into the back of the truck, and the man drove them down the mountain, the heater blasting, the radio playing some old country song Landon didn't recognize. Serena sat next to him, her shoulder pressed against his, and he felt her hand slip into his, just for a second, before she pulled it away. They reached town just as the sun was setting. The man dropped them off at a gas station and Landon thanked him, handing him $20 from his wallet. The man waved it off, but Landon insisted, and eventually he took it. Landon and Serena stood in the parking lot, their packs at their feet, and looked around. The town was small, just a main street with a few shops and a diner, but it felt like civilization after weeks on the mountain. Landon pulled out his phone and turned it on. It had been dead for days, but there was a charging station inside the gas station, and he plugged it in while Serena used the bathroom. When his phone finally powered up, it exploded with notifications. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages. Most of them were from his sister asking where he was, if he was okay, if he was coming home soon. A few were from Emma, voice messages that said things like, "Daddy, when are you coming back?" and "I miss you." Landon's throat tightened, and he had to set the phone down for a second to keep his hands from shaking. Serena came out of the bathroom looking cleaner but still exhausted. "You okay?" "Yeah, just messages from home." "Is Emma all right?" "Yeah, she's fine." He picked up his phone and scrolled through the messages. "My sister's been worried, though. I need to call her." "Go ahead. I'll wait." Landon stepped outside and dialed his sister's number. She picked up on the first ring. "Landon? Oh my God, where the hell have you been? I've been calling you for weeks." "I'm sorry, Jen. I was up on the ridge. The storm knocked out the phone lines." "Are you okay? Is the cabin still standing?" "The cabin's fine. I'm fine. I'm in town now." "Thank God. Emma's been asking about you constantly. She keeps saying she wants to talk to you." "Can I talk to her?" "Yeah, hold on." There was a rustling sound, and then Emma's voice came through the phone, small and sweet and exactly what Landon needed to hear. "Daddy? Hey, sweetheart. I'm here." "Where have you been? Aunt Jen said you were stuck in the snow." "I was, but I'm okay now. I'll be home soon." "Promise?" "I promise." "Okay. I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Em. More than anything." He talked to her for a few more minutes, telling her about the cabin and the snow and the work he'd been doing, leaving out the parts about carbon monoxide and near-death experiences. When she finally said goodbye, Landon felt something settle in his chest, something that had been loose and frantic for too long. He went back inside and found Serena sitting at a table in the gas station's tiny diner, a cup of coffee in front of her. He sat down across from her, and she pushed a second cup toward him. "Figured you could use this," she said. "Thanks." They sat there in silence for a while, drinking their coffee, and then Serena said, "I need to find a lawyer. Tonight, if possible. The longer we wait, the more time my father has to finalize the deal." "I can call my friend," Landon said. "See if he's still practicing." "Do it." Landon pulled up his contacts and found the number for Marcus Holt, the environmental lawyer. It rang 4 times before a voice answered. "This is Marcus." "Marcus, it's Landon Ridge. We worked together a few years back, up in the Northern District." "Landon, man, it's been a while. How have you been?" "I've been better. Listen, I need your help with something. It's urgent." "What's going on?" Landon handed the phone to Serena. "Tell him." Serena took the phone and started explaining, laying out the entire situation in clear, precise language. Landon watched her talk, saw the way her eyes sharpened, the way her voice steadied, and he realized this was who she really was. Not the broken woman who'd stumbled out of that SUV 6 weeks ago, but this, someone who could stare down a corporate empire and not blink. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Marcus said, "If what you're telling me is true, this is the biggest environmental case I've ever heard of. Can you get me those documents? I have them with me, all of them. Then meet me at my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I'll start filing injunctions immediately." "Thank you," Serena said, her voice breaking just a little. "Thank you so much." She handed the phone back to Landon, and he gave Marcus the details before hanging up. When he set the phone down, Serena was crying, tears streaming down her face, and she didn't bother trying to hide them. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." "You did it," Landon corrected. "I just helped you get down the mountain." "No, we did it together." She reached across the table and took his hand, and this time she didn't let go. Landon squeezed back, his bandaged fingers aching, and thought about everything they'd been through. The cold, the hunger, the fear, the storm, the carbon monoxide leak that had almost killed them both. The 15-mile hike through snow that should have been impossible. They'd survived it all, and now, finally, they had a chance to fight back. But as they sat there in that tiny gas station diner, holding hands across a chipped Formica table, Landon heard the rumble of an engine outside. He looked up and saw a black SUV pull into the parking lot, the same kind of SUV that had brought Serena to the mountain 6 weeks ago. "Serena," he said quietly. She followed his gaze and went pale. "That's them." "Who?" "My father's people." The SUV doors opened and 2 men stepped out. One of them was the same guy who'd driven Serena up to the cabin, the one she'd called Marcus. The other was younger, bigger, with the kind of build that came from spending a lot of time in a gym. They scanned the parking lot, and when they spotted Serena through the diner window, they started walking toward the door. Landon stood up. "Stay here." "Landon, stay here." He walked out of the diner and stepped into the parking lot, putting himself between Serena and the 2 men. They stopped a few feet away, sizing him up. "We're here for Serena Vale," the older one said. "She's not going anywhere with you," Landon said. "That's not your decision." "Yeah, it is." The younger guy stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "This doesn't concern you, buddy. Walk away." "No." "You really want to do this? Try me." The younger guy lunged, throwing a punch that Landon saw coming from a mile away. He ducked, drove his shoulder into the guy's stomach, and sent him sprawling into the snow. The older guy reached for something inside his jacket, and Landon moved fast, grabbing his wrist and twisting it until he heard something pop. The man yelled and dropped to his knees, and Landon kicked whatever he'd been reaching for across the parking lot. It was a phone, not a weapon, just a phone. Landon stepped back, breathing hard, and the 2 men scrambled to their feet, backing toward the SUV. The younger one looked like he wanted to take another swing, but the older one grabbed his arm. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah, it is," Landon said. "Tell her father she's not coming back. Tell him she's done playing his games. And tell him if he sends anyone else after her, they're going to get worse than a dislocated wrist." The 2 men got into the SUV and drove off, tires spinning in the slush. Landon watched them go, his heart pounding, and then he turned back to the diner. Serena was standing in the doorway, her face pale but her eyes blazing. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yeah, I did. They could have hurt you." "They didn't." She walked over to him and threw her arms around his neck, pulling him into a hug so tight it almost hurt. Landon froze for a second, surprised, and then he wrapped his arms around her waist and held on. "Thank you," she whispered into his shoulder. "Thank you for everything." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." They stood there in the parking lot, holding each other while the snow started to fall again, light and soft. And Landon realized that somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just a job. Somewhere between the cabin and the carbon monoxide and the 15-mile hike through hell, he'd started caring about her, not just as someone he was trying to help, but as someone he didn't want to lose. And judging by the way she was holding on to him, she felt the same way. When they finally pulled apart, Serena wiped at her eyes and said, "We should get a hotel room. I need to clean up before we meet with Marcus tomorrow." "Yeah, good idea." They found a cheap motel on the edge of town and got 2 rooms next to each other. Landon took a shower that lasted 20 minutes, scrubbing off weeks of dirt and smoke and exhaustion, and when he got out, he felt almost human again. He checked his phone and found another message from his sister, asking when he'd be home. He texted back, telling her he'd be there in a few days, that he just had to finish something first. There was a knock on the door. Landon opened it and found Serena standing there, her hair wet, wearing clean clothes she must have bought at the gas station. She looked different. Younger, maybe. Or just less tired. "Hey," she said. "Hey. Can I come in?" "Yeah." She stepped inside and Landon closed the door behind her. They stood there for a moment, neither of them quite sure what to say, and then Serena said, "I don't want to be alone tonight." "You don't have to be." She sat down on the edge of the bed, and Landon sat next to her. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and they stayed like that for a long time, not talking, just existing in the same space. It felt right, like something that had been waiting to happen for weeks, maybe longer. "What are we doing?" Serena asked quietly. "I don't know. Are we just surviving together, or is this something else?" Landon thought about it. "I think it's something else." "Good," she said, "because I don't want this to end when the case is over. Neither do I." She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Then what do we do?" "We figure it out," Landon said, "one day at a time." Serena smiled, a real smile this time, and kissed him. It was soft and tentative, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed, but Landon kissed her back, and it stopped being tentative. It became something urgent, something desperate, like they were both trying to hold on to something they'd almost lost. When they finally pulled apart, Serena was crying again, but this time they were good tears. "I thought I was going to die up there," she said. "I really did." "But you didn't." "No, we didn't. And now we're here." "Yeah, now we're here." They lay down on the bed together, still dressed, still holding each other, and Landon thought about the mountain, about the cabin, about everything they'd been through. He thought about Emma waiting for him at home, and he thought about Serena's father somewhere out there, probably furious that his plan had fallen apart. But mostly, he thought about this, about the woman in his arms who'd been thrown away by her family and had fought her way back anyway, about the way she'd learned to split firewood and haul water and survive in a place that had tried to kill her, about the way she made him feel like he was more than just a contractor trying to scrape by, like he was someone worth knowing. And he thought that maybe, just maybe, they'd both found something on that mountain that neither of them had been looking for, something worth keeping. They woke up tangled together, still fully clothed, the morning light cutting through the cheap motel curtains like a knife. Landon's first thought was that he'd slept better than he had in months, and his second thought was that Serena was already awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression he couldn't read. "You okay?" he asked. She turned her head to look at him. "I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of walking into that lawyer's office and finding out this whole thing was pointless, that my father's already closed the deal, that we risked our lives for nothing." Landon propped himself up on one elbow. "That's not going to happen. You don't know that." "No, I don't. But I know you didn't come this far to give up now." Serena sat up, running her hands through her hair. "What if Marcus can't help? What if the documents aren't enough?" "Then we find another way." "There might not be another way." "Then we make one," Landon said. "But you don't quit, not after everything you've done." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she nodded. "All right, let's go." They got dressed, grabbed the folder of documents, and walked to Marcus Holt's office on the other side of town. It was in a converted house, the kind of place that probably used to be someone's home before it got turned into office space. The sign out front said Holt Environmental Law in faded letters, and there were dead plants in the window boxes. Marcus himself answered the door. He was in his mid-40s, tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a tired smile. "Landon, it's good to see you." "You too, Marcus. This is Serena Vale." Marcus shook her hand, his grip firm. "Come on in. Let's see what you've got." They sat in his office, a cluttered room filled with filing cabinets and stacks of case files, and Serena spread out her documents on the desk. Marcus put on his glasses and started reading, his expression growing more serious with each page. He took notes, asked questions, cross-referenced dates and company names, and didn't say a word for nearly an hour. Finally, he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "This is explosive." Serena leaned forward. "Is it enough?" "It's more than enough. If even half of this holds up in court, your father's looking at criminal charges. Environmental fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and Cordova Extraction is looking at penalties that could bankrupt them. Can you stop the land sale? I can file for an emergency injunction today. It'll freeze the transfer until we can get a hearing, and with this evidence, I think we've got a strong case for a full investigation." Serena's hands were shaking. "How long will it take?" "Months, maybe a year. These things don't move fast, but the injunction should hold. Your father won't be able to sell until the case is resolved. And the people in the valley? The families who would have been evicted? They'll be safe, Marcus said, at least for now. Serena closed her eyes, and Landon saw her shoulders sag like she'd been holding up the world and could finally set it down. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've got a hell of a fight ahead of us. Your father's not going to take this lying down. I know. Marcus started drafting the injunction paperwork, and Landon and Serena waited in the outer office, drinking bad coffee from a pot that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Serena kept checking her phone like she was expecting her father to call, to scream at her, to threaten her. But the phone stayed silent. What are you going to do after this? Landon asked. Serena looked up. What do you mean? I mean, when the case is over, when your father's in jail or bankrupt or whatever happens to him, what are you going to do? She thought about it for a long time. I don't know. I spent my whole life trying to live up to his expectations, and then I spent the last 6 weeks trying to tear him down. I don't know who I am when I'm not doing one of those two things. Maybe that's something you get to figure out. Maybe. She set down her coffee cup. What about you? Are you going back to the cabin? I have to. The restoration project's not finished. And after that? Landon shrugged. I don't know. Find another job, I guess. Keep working. Keep trying to give Emma a stable life. Serena was quiet for a moment, and then she said, What if you didn't have to find another job? What if the work came to you? What are you talking about? I've been thinking about it since last night. You're good at what you do, Landon. Really good. And I've got money, connections, business experience. What if we partnered up? You handle the restoration work, I handle the business side. We could build something real. Landon stared at her. You want to go into business together? Why not? We work well together, and I trust you. That's more than I can say for most people. Serena, I'm a contractor. I fix cabins and replace roofs. I don't know anything about running a business. You don't have to. That's my job. Your job is to do what you're already doing, just on a bigger scale. We could take on historic restorations, conservation projects, the kind of work that actually matters. And we do it right, not cutting corners, not screwing people over, just honest work. Landon thought about it. He thought about spending the rest of his life chasing jobs, bidding on contracts, hoping some faceless corporation would throw him enough work to keep the lights on. And then he thought about what Serena was offering. A real partnership. A chance to build something that could last. Something he could be proud of. Something he could pass on to Emma one day. Equal partners? He asked. Equal partners. And I get final say on all the restoration work? Absolutely. Landon held out his hand. Then I'm in. Serena shook it, her grip strong, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked genuinely happy. We're really doing this? Yeah, we are. Marcus came out of his office an hour later with a stack of papers. The injunction's filed. I've also contacted the State Attorney General's office and the EPA. They're both interested in opening investigations. This is going to be a long fight, but we've got the momentum. What happens now? Serena asked. Now we wait. The court will schedule a hearing probably within the next week. Your father's lawyers will try to fight the injunction, but with this evidence, I don't think they'll succeed. And if they do, then we fight harder. They left Marcus's office and walked back to the motel. The town looked different in daylight, smaller, shabbier, but also strangely peaceful. Landon realized he'd spent so long up on that mountain, cut off from the world, that he'd forgotten what normal life looked like. People going to work, kids walking to school, cars stopped at red lights. It was ordinary and boring and beautiful. Serena's phone rang. She looked at the screen and went pale. It's my father. You gonna answer it? I don't know. Your call. She stared at the phone for a long moment, and then she answered. Hello. Landon couldn't hear what her father was saying, but he could hear the tone, loud, angry, venomous. Serena listened for about 30 seconds, her face blank, and then she said, I'm done listening to you. There was a pause, and then her father's voice got louder. Serena held the phone away from her ear, and Landon could hear fragments of what he was saying, something about betrayal, Something about destroying the family. Something about consequences. Are you finished? Serena asked. Her voice was calm, cold, nothing like the woman who'd been terrified 6 weeks ago. Good. Here's what's going to happen. I filed an injunction to stop your land sale. I've turned over evidence of environmental fraud to the State Attorney General and the EPA, and I've partnered with one of the best environmental lawyers in the state to make sure you never get away with this. Her father started yelling again, but Serena talked over him. You sent me to that mountain to break me, to teach me a lesson, to get me out of the way while you destroyed people's lives for profit. But you made a mistake. You underestimated me. You always have. And now I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. She hung up. Her hands were shaking, but her face was set, determined. Landon put his hand on her shoulder. You all right? Yeah, I'm all right. That took guts. That took 6 weeks of freezing my ass off and almost dying. Compared to that, telling off my father was easy. They walked back to the motel, and Serena said she needed to make more calls. Lawyers, journalists, people who could help spread the word about what her father had done. Landon left her to it and called his sister. Landon, thank God. Are you okay? I'm fine, Jen. I'm coming home soon, maybe a few more days. Emma's going to be so happy. She's been asking about you every day. Can I talk to her? She's at school right now, but I'll have her call you tonight. Thanks, Jen. And hey, I need to ask you something. What? How would you feel if I moved the business closer to town? Maybe set up a real office, hire some help, take on bigger projects? There was a pause. Are you serious? Yeah, I think I am. Landon, that's amazing. What brought this on? He looked over at Serena, who was pacing the motel parking lot with her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly as she talked. I met someone, and we're going to try to build something together. Jen was quiet for a moment. Is this someone the reason you sound different? Different how? I don't know. Happier, maybe. Less like you're carrying the world on your shoulders. Landon thought about it. Yeah, maybe she is. Then I'm happy for you. Just don't screw it up. I'll try not to. That night, they drove back up to the cabin. Landon needed to finish the restoration project, and Serena wanted to see the place one more time before they officially turned it into something new. The road was clear now, the snow melting in the late winter sun, and the drive took less than an hour. When they pulled up to the cabin, Landon felt a strange sense of nostalgia. The place looked different now, less like a prison and more like something they'd built together. The new porch supports were solid, the windows were sealed, and the roof was tight. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. It would last. Serena got out of the truck and walked up to the porch, running her hand along the railing. I can't believe I used to hate this place. And now? Now it feels like home. They spent the next 3 days finishing the work. Landon installed the last of the window panes, fixed the loose floorboards in the back bedroom, and repaired the exhaust vent on the generator. Serena painted the interior walls, sanded down the rough spots on the door frames, and cleaned out the old stone fireplace until it looked almost new. They worked side by side, hardly talking, just moving in rhythm like they'd been doing this together for years. And when the work was done, they stood on the porch and looked out at the ridge, at the mountains beyond, at the sky turning orange and pink with the sunset. We should keep this place, Serena said. As what? As our base, our headquarters. We can use it for meetings, for storage, for a retreat when we need to get away from everything. And it's a reminder. A reminder of what? Of what we survived, of what we built, of where we started. Landon nodded. I like that. 2 weeks later, the court hearing happened. Marcus argued the injunction in front of a judge who listened carefully, read through the evidence, and ruled in their favor. The land sale was frozen indefinitely, pending a full investigation. Cordova Extraction pulled out of the deal entirely, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. And Serena's father was served with subpoenas from 3 different agencies, all of them demanding answers. Landon didn't go to the hearing. He stayed home with Emma, taking her to the park, helping her with homework, making up for all the time he'd been gone. But Serena called him afterward, her voice shaking with relief and triumph. We won, she said. I knew you would. My father's lawyers tried everything. They claimed the documents were forged, that I had a vendetta, that the whole thing was a personal attack. But the judge didn't buy it. Marcus was incredible. He tore them apart. So what happens now? Now the investigations continue, and I get to rebuild my life on my own terms. Sounds good to me. A month later, the mail arrived at the cabin with an official-looking envelope addressed to Serena Vale. She opened it and read the letter inside, her eyes going wide. "What is it?" Landon asked. "It's from the Trust's legal team. They're dissolving my father's control over the family assets, and they're transferring ownership of the cabin to me, free and clear, no strings attached." Landon looked at her. "You own this place now?" "We own it. I'm putting it in both our names." "Serena, you don't have to say—" "Yes, I do. This cabin doesn't belong to my family anymore. It belongs to us, to the people who fought for it." Landon didn't know what to say to that, so he just pulled her into a hug, and she held on tight. That same day, Landon got his own piece of good news. The state inspector had signed off on his restoration work, officially certifying the cabin as historically preserved and structurally sound. It meant he could add the project to his portfolio, use it as a reference for future jobs. It meant years of hard work had finally paid off. They celebrated that night with cheap wine and takeout pizza, sitting on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. Emma was with them, running around the clearing, collecting pine cones and asking a million questions about everything. Serena watched her with a soft smile, and Landon realized that this was what he'd been fighting for all along. Not just survival, not just work, but this. A life that felt real and whole, and worth living. "She's amazing," Serena said. "Yeah, she is. You're a good dad, Landon. I'm trying. That's all anyone can do." Emma ran up to the porch, holding a pine cone the size of her fist. "Look what I found." "That's a big one," Landon said. "Can I keep it?" "Sure, sweetheart." Emma ran off again, and Serena laughed. "She's got your energy." "She's got her mother's stubbornness." "Good. She'll need it." They sat there in comfortable silence, and Landon thought about everything that had happened. The storm, the cabin, the carbon monoxide leak, the 15-mile hike through hell, the lawyers and the injunctions, and the fight against a man who'd tried to destroy his own daughter. It had been brutal and terrifying and impossible, and they'd survived it all. And now they were here, on the other side, building something new. "What do you think we should call it?" Serena asked. "Call what?" "Our business. We need a name." Landon thought about it. "Ridge Summit Restoration." Serena smiled. "I like it. It's got a nice ring to it. And it's honest. That's what we do. We restore things, not just buildings," Serena said quietly. "People, too." Landon looked at her, and he saw in her eyes the same thing he felt in his chest, that they'd both been broken when they met, both trying to survive in their own ways, and somehow they'd managed to put each other back together. They spent the next 6 months building Ridge Summit Restoration from the ground up. Landon handled the fieldwork, taking on projects across the state, old barns, historic houses, conservation sites that needed careful hands and patient work. Serena handled the business side, securing contracts, managing finances, building relationships with clients who wanted quality over speed. They hired a small crew, people Landon trusted, and the work started to flow. Emma loved it. She loved visiting the job sites, loved watching her father work, loved sitting in Serena's office and pretending to answer phones. And she loved Serena, who treated her like she mattered, who asked her questions and listened to the answers, who never talked down to her. One day, while they were working on a restoration project for an old church in the valley, Emma asked Landon if Serena was his girlfriend. "Yeah," Landon said. "I think she is." "Are you going to marry her?" Landon laughed. "I don't know, Em. Maybe someday. I hope you do. I like her." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." By the end of the year, Ridge Summit Restoration had completed 12 major projects and had contracts lined up for 6 more. They'd made enough money to rent a real office in town, hire a full-time crew, and start saving for the future. And the cabin on the ridge had become exactly what Serena had wanted it to be: a base, a retreat, a reminder of where they'd started. One night, after finishing a job on a farmhouse outside town, Landon and Serena sat on the cabin porch, watching the stars come out. Emma was asleep inside, curled up in a sleeping bag by the wood stove, and the world was quiet except for the wind in the trees. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Serena asked. "How do you mean?" "If the storm hadn't hit, if the carbon monoxide leak hadn't happened, if we just stayed strangers working on the same property." Landon thought about it. "Yeah, I think about it sometimes." "Do you wish things had been easier?" "No," he said, "because if it had been easy, we wouldn't have learned what we're made of. We wouldn't have figured out how to trust each other, and we wouldn't be here now." Serena nodded. "I used to think my father sent me to that mountain to destroy me, but I think he accidentally gave me the best thing that ever happened to me." "What's that?" "The chance to start over, to figure out who I am when nobody's telling me what to be, and to find someone who sees me for who I really am, not who my last name says I should be." Landon took her hand. "You did that yourself. I just helped a little." "You did more than help. You saved my life. More than once. And you saved mine." They sat there holding hands, and Landon realized that everything he'd been searching for, stability, purpose, a future worth fighting for, he'd found it here. Not in the work, not in the money, but in the woman sitting next to him, and the little girl sleeping inside, and the life they were building together, piece by piece, just like the cabins he restored. A year after that first storm, Serena got a letter from her father's lawyers. He was offering a settlement. He'd sign over full control of the family trust to her if she agreed to drop the criminal investigations. Serena read the letter twice, then handed it to Landon. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think it's your decision. But what would you do?" Landon thought about it. "I'd tell him to go to hell. You didn't fight this hard just to let him buy his way out." Serena smiled. "That's what I thought too." She wrote back, declining the settlement and doubling down on the investigations. Her father's empire started to crumble after that. Shareholders abandoned him, business partners cut ties, and the legal walls closed in. Within 6 months, he was facing indictments on multiple charges, and the family trust was dissolved entirely, the assets distributed to creditors and charity. Serena didn't get the money. She didn't want it. What she got was something better: freedom. The knowledge that she'd stood up to the man who'd tried to control her entire life and won. That she'd built something real with her own hands, something that didn't come from family money or corporate power or inherited wealth. Something that was hers. 2 years after they met, Landon asked Serena to marry him. He did it on the porch of the cabin, with Emma standing next to him holding a ring box, and Serena cried and said yes before he could even finish the question. They got married in the clearing outside the cabin, with a small crowd of friends and family and the crew from Ridge Summit Restoration. Emma was the flower girl, and Marcus Holt was Landon's best man, and the ceremony was simple and imperfect and exactly what they wanted. And when it was over, when the guests had left and the sun had set and it was just the three of them sitting on the porch, Landon looked at his wife and his daughter and thought about how far they'd all come. From the black SUV tearing up the gravel road to the carbon monoxide leak that almost killed them to the 15-mile hike through hell to this: a family, a business, a life built on trust and hard work, and the kind of love that only comes after surviving the storm. Emma fell asleep between them, her head on Serena's lap, and Serena ran her fingers through the girl's hair, humming softly. Landon watched them, and he thought about all the things he'd learned on that mountain. That survival isn't about being strong or perfect or never making mistakes. It's about showing up, doing the work, and refusing to quit even when everything feels impossible. It's about trusting the people who fight beside you and building something real out of broken pieces. And it's about understanding that sometimes the things that try to destroy you end up making you stronger. That the worst storms can lead to the clearest skies. That exile can become freedom, and isolation can become home, and two people who should have been strangers can become everything to each other. The cabin stood behind them, solid and warm, filled with the ghosts of everything they'd survived, and the promise of everything still to come. The mountain stretched out in the darkness, vast and indifferent, the same mountain that had tried to kill them and failed. And Landon thought that maybe that was the point, that you don't survive the mountain by conquering it. You survive by learning to live with it, to respect it, to build something that can weather the storms and last. "What are you thinking about?" Serena asked quietly. "I'm thinking we did pretty good," Landon said. "Yeah, we did. And I'm thinking I'm glad your father sent you up here, even if he did it for the wrong reasons." Serena laughed softly. "Me too." Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about pine cones, and they both smiled. Landon put his arm around Serena's shoulders, and she leaned into him, and they sat there on the porch of the cabin they'd saved, watching the stars come out over the ridge. The same stars that had watched them freeze and fight and nearly die. The same stars that were watching them now, alive and whole and together. And somewhere, far below in the valley, the families who would have lost their homes to the mining operation were sleeping safe in their beds, never knowing how close they'd come to losing everything. Never knowing that a disgraced billionaire heiress and a single-father contractor had fought a war on a frozen mountain to save them. But that was all right, because some victories don't need witnesses. Some battles are fought in silence, in snow, in the space between one breath and the next. And the only thing that matters is that when the storm finally breaks, you're still standing. Landon looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the cabin that had become their home and their battleground and their beginning. And he thought that if he'd learned anything from the mountain, it was this, that the best things in life aren't the things that come easy. They're the things you have to fight for, the things you nearly lose, the things that make you bleed and break and become something stronger than you were before. The 32-year-old single father and the 30-year-old billionaire heiress didn't just survive the mountain. They conquered it. Not with force or money or power, but with something simpler and infinitely more valuable. With stubborn determination, with trust earned in the coldest places, and with the understanding that sometimes the people who save you are the ones you never saw coming. And in the end, they built a life from old wood, buried secrets, and the kind of love that only grows in the harshest conditions. A life that would outlast the storms, outlast the mountains, outlast every attempt to tear it down. Because they'd learned the hardest lesson the mountain had to teach, that survival is just the beginning. What you build after, that's what matters. That's what lasts. When they pulled up to the cabin, Landon felt a strange sense of nostalgia. The place looked different now, less like a prison and more like something they'd built together. The new porch supports were solid, the windows were sealed, and the roof was tight. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. It would last. Serena got out of the truck and walked up to the porch, running her hand along the railing. "I can't believe I used to hate this place. And now? Now it feels like home." They spent the next 3 days finishing the work. Landon installed the last of the window panes, fixed the loose floorboards in the back bedroom, and repaired the exhaust vent on the generator. Serena painted the interior walls, sanded down the rough spots on the door frames, and cleaned out the old stone fireplace until it looked almost new. They worked side by side, hardly talking, just moving in rhythm like they'd been doing this together for years. And when the work was done, they stood on the porch and looked out at the ridge, at the mountains beyond, at the sky turning orange and pink with the sunset. "We should keep this place," Serena said. "As what?" "As our base, our headquarters. We can use it for meetings, for storage, for a retreat when we need to get away from everything. And it's a reminder. A reminder of what? Of what we survived, of what we built, of where we started." Landon nodded. "I like that." 2 weeks later, the court hearing happened. Marcus argued the injunction in front of a judge who listened carefully, read through the evidence, and ruled in their favor. The land sale was frozen indefinitely, pending a full investigation. Cordova Extraction pulled out of the deal entirely, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. And Serena's father was served with subpoenas from 3 different agencies, all of them demanding answers. Landon didn't go to the hearing. He stayed home with Emma, taking her to the park, helping her with homework, making up for all the time he'd been gone. But Serena called him afterward, her voice shaking with relief and triumph. "We won," she said. "I knew you would." "My father's lawyers tried everything. They claimed the documents were forged, that I had a vendetta, that the whole thing was a personal attack. But the judge didn't buy it. Marcus was incredible. He tore them apart. So what happens now?" "Now the investigations continue, and I get to rebuild my life on my own terms." "Sounds good to me." A month later, The mail arrived at the cabin with an official-looking envelope addressed to Serena Vale. She opened it and read the letter inside, her eyes going wide. "What is it?" Landon asked. "It's from the trust legal team. They're dissolving my father's control over the family assets. And they're transferring ownership of the cabin to me, free and clear, no strings attached." Landon looked at her. "You own this place now?" "We own it. I'm putting it in both our names." "Serena, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. This cabin doesn't belong to my family anymore. It belongs to us, to the people who fought for it." Landon didn't know what to say to that, so he just pulled her into a hug, and she held on tight. That same day, Landon got his own piece of good news. The state inspector had signed off on his restoration work, officially certifying the cabin as historically preserved and structurally sound. It meant he could add the project to his portfolio, use it as a reference for future jobs. It meant years of hard work had finally paid off. They celebrated that night with cheap wine and takeout pizza, sitting on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. Emma was with them, running around the clearing, collecting pine cones and asking a million questions about everything. Serena watched her with a soft smile, and Landon realized that this was what he'd been fighting for all along. Not just survival, not just work, but this, a life that felt real and whole and worth living. "She's amazing," Serena said. "Yeah, she is." "You're a good dad, Landon." "I'm trying. That's all anyone can do." Emma ran up to the porch, holding a pine cone the size of her fist. "Look what I found." "That's a big one," Landon said. "Can I keep it?" "Sure, sweetheart." Emma ran off again, and Serena laughed. "She's got your energy." "She's got her mother's stubbornness." "Good. She'll need it." They sat there in comfortable silence, and Landon thought about everything that had happened. The storm, the cabin, the carbon monoxide leak, the 15-mile hike through hell, the lawyers and the injunctions, and the fight against a man who tried to destroy his own daughter. It had been brutal and terrifying and impossible, and they'd survived it all. And now they were here, on the other side, building something new. "What do you think we should call it?" Serena asked. "Call what?" "Our business. We need a name." Landon thought about it. "Ridge Summit Restoration." Serena smiled. "I like it. It's got a nice ring to it." "And it's honest. That's what we do. We restore things." "Not just buildings," Serena said quietly. "People, too." Landon looked at her, and he saw in her eyes the same thing he felt in his chest, that they'd both been broken when they met, both trying to survive in their own ways, and somehow they'd managed to put each other back together. They spent the next 6 months building Ridge Summit Restoration from the ground up. Landon handled the field work, taking on projects across the state, old barns, historic houses, conservation sites that needed careful hands and patient work. Serena handled the business side, securing contracts, managing finances, building relationships with clients who wanted quality over speed. They hired a small crew, people Landon trusted, and the work started to flow. Emma loved it. She loved visiting the job sites, loved watching her father work, loved sitting in Serena's office and pretending to answer phones. And she loved Serena, who treated her like she mattered, who asked her questions and listened to the answers, who never talked down to her. One day, while they were working on a restoration project for an old church in the valley, Emma asked Landon if Serena was his girlfriend. "Yeah," Landon said. "I think she is." "Are you going to marry her?" Landon laughed. "I don't know, Em. Maybe someday." "I hope you do. I like her." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." By the end of the year, Ridge Summit Restoration had completed 12 major projects and had contracts lined up for 6 more. They'd made enough money to rent a real office in town, hire a full-time crew, and start saving for the future. And the cabin on the ridge had become exactly what Serena had wanted it to be. A base, a retreat, a reminder of where they'd started. One night, after finishing a job on a farmhouse outside town, Landon and Serena sat on the cabin porch, watching the stars come out. Emma was asleep inside, curled up in a sleeping bag by the wood stove, and the world was quiet except for the wind in the trees. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Serena asked. "How do you mean?" "If the storm hadn't hit, if the carbon monoxide leak hadn't happened, if we'd just stayed strangers working on the same property." Landon thought about it. "Yeah, I think about it sometimes." "Do you wish things had been easier?" "No," he said. Because if it had been easy, we wouldn't have learned what we're made of. We wouldn't have figured out how to trust each other, and we wouldn't be here now. Serena nodded. I used to think my father sent me to that mountain to destroy me, but I think he accidentally gave me the best thing that ever happened to me. What's that? The chance to start over, to figure out who I am when nobody's telling me what to be, and to find someone who sees me for who I really am, not who my last name says I should be. Landon took her hand. You did that yourself. I just helped a little. You did more than help. You saved my life, more than once. And you saved mine. They sat there holding hands, and Landon realized that everything he'd been searching for, stability, purpose, a future worth fighting for, he'd found it here. Not in the work, not in the money, but in the woman sitting next to him, and the little girl sleeping inside, and the life they were building together, piece by piece, just like the cabins he restored. A year after that first storm, Serena got a letter from her father's lawyers. He was offering a settlement. He'd sign over full control of the family trust to her if she agreed to drop the criminal investigations. Serena read the letter twice, then handed it to Landon. What do you think? She asked. I think it's your decision. But what would you do? Landon thought about it. I'd tell him to go to hell. You didn't fight this hard just to let him buy his way out. Serena smiled. That's what I thought too. She wrote back, declining the settlement and doubling down on the investigations. Her father's empire started to crumble after that. Shareholders abandoned him, business partners cut ties, and the legal walls closed in. Within 6 months, he was facing indictments on multiple charges, and the family trust was dissolved entirely. The assets distributed to creditors and charity. Serena didn't get the money. She didn't want it. What she got was something better, freedom. The knowledge that she'd stood up to the man who'd tried to control her entire life and won. That she'd built something real with her own hands, something that didn't come from family money or corporate power or inherited wealth. Something that was hers. 2 years after they met, Landon asked Serena to marry him. He did it on the porch of the cabin, with Emma standing next to him holding a ring box. And Serena cried and said yes before he could even finish the question. They got married in the clearing outside the cabin, with a small crowd of friends and family and the crew from Ridge Summit Restoration. Emma was the flower girl, and Marcus Holt was Landon's best man, and the ceremony was simple and imperfect and exactly what they wanted. And when it was over, when the guests had left and the sun had set, and it was just the three of them sitting on the porch, Landon looked at his wife and his daughter and thought about how far they'd all come. From the black SUV tearing up the gravel road to the carbon monoxide leak that almost killed them to the 15-mile hike through hell to this. A family, a business, a life built on trust and hard work and the kind of love that only comes after surviving the storm. Emma fell asleep between them, her head on Serena's lap, and Serena ran her fingers through the girl's hair, humming softly. Landon watched them, and he thought about all the things he'd learned on that mountain. That survival isn't about being strong or perfect or never making mistakes. It's about showing up, doing the work, and refusing to quit even when everything feels impossible. It's about trusting the people who fight beside you and building something real out of broken pieces. And it's about understanding that sometimes the things that try to destroy you end up making you stronger. That the worst storms can lead to the clearest skies. That exile can become freedom and isolation can become home. And two people who should have been strangers can become everything to each other. The cabin stood behind them, solid and warm, filled with the ghosts of everything they'd survived and the promise of everything still to come. The mountain stretched out in the darkness, vast and indifferent, the same mountain that had tried to kill them and failed. And Landon thought that maybe that was the point, that you don't survive the mountain by conquering it. You survive by learning to live with it, to respect it, to build something that can weather the storms and last. What are you thinking about? Serena asked quietly. I'm thinking we did pretty good, Landon said. Yeah, we did. And I'm thinking I'm glad your father sent you up here, even if he did it for the wrong reasons. Serena laughed softly. Me too. Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about pine cones, and they both smiled. Landon put his arm around Serena's shoulders, and she leaned into him, and they sat there on the porch of the cabin they'd saved, watching the stars come out over the ridge. The same stars that had watched them freeze and fight and nearly die. The same stars that were watching them now, alive and whole and together. And somewhere far below in the valley, the families who would have lost their homes to the mining operation were sleeping safe in their beds, never knowing how close they'd come to losing everything, never knowing that a disgraced billionaire heiress and a single father contractor had fought a war on a frozen mountain to save them. But that was all right, because some victories don't need witnesses. Some battles are fought in silence, in snow, in the space between one breath and the next. And the only thing that matters is that when the storm finally breaks, you're still standing. Landon looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the cabin that had become their home and their battleground and their beginning. And he thought that if he'd learned anything from the mountain, it was this: that the best things in life aren't the things that come easy. They're the things you have to fight for, the things you nearly lose, the things that make you bleed and break and become something stronger than you were before. The 32-year-old single father and the 30-year-old billionaire heiress didn't just survive the mountain, they conquered it. Not with force or money or power, but with something simpler and infinitely more valuable. With stubborn determination, with trust earned in the coldest places, and with the understanding that sometimes the people who save you are the ones you never saw coming. And in the end, they built a life from old wood, buried secrets, and the kind of love that only grows in the harshest conditions. A life that would outlast the storms, outlast the mountains, outlast every attempt to tear it down. Because they'd learned the hardest lesson the mountain had to teach, that survival is just the beginning. What you build after, that's what matters. That's what lasts.